Hi, and welcome to another episode of Silver Goose Farm Stories. I'm your host, Mama Goose, aka Maria Silva. As I mentioned in the last podcast, our two cows decided to sync up calving days to the week after my husband and I came home from the hospital with our new baby. Since then, my husband and our oldest daughter have sort of jumped right back into the regular farming schedule, and they go out early morning and do the milkings. It's a really great bonding time for them, and I am genuinely happy that they get to have that sort of special moment together every day. And while I do miss our personal morning milking chats that we'd have to start off the day, and missing out on that level of productivity so early on, because it's really great for your mindset to get up early and get something done right away. But there is also something to be said about waking up after snuggling with our two youngest that still share our room and magically having milk appear in the fridge without having had to do any work to get it. A girl can get used to that. The calves are growing strong and healthy. But since they're unfortunately summertime babies, they've also immediately been thrown into the fly gauntlet that we experience here in the homestead every summer at the full heat of this season. So I guess today I'd like to talk about what that looks like here on the homestead. I guess I'll start off with a little bit of a sidebar. A little tidbit about me is that I have a deep-seated repulsion, an intense fear of bugs. Bugs of all kinds, not just spiders or the ugly ones that other people tend to avoid, but I also dislike butterflies and ladybugs and all those pretty ones that people tend to make exceptions for. I do understand that they are an important part of a balanced ecosystem, and I don't actually want them dead or exterminated by any means. I just don't want them to be near me. I remember having this conversation. My mother-in-law, when we lived in the Bay Area, would take my two oldest, I only had two at the time, and she would volunteer to take them on like a day trip out to Santa Cruz. In the Bay Area, there's this place where the monarch butterflies come and lay their eggs and hatch, I guess, like emerge from their chrysalises. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of them all gathered and hanging from trees and branches and bridges and stuff. And it's supposed to be like very magical because you're surrounded by all these beautiful butterflies. And I was trying to encourage my kids to go because they were very young and not used to being away from me for a long period of time, and just telling them like, oh, imagine all those beautiful like orange and yellow wings like fluttering in the air and just hanging off trees. Like, wouldn't that be so magical to see? Aren't you excited? And my mother-in-law would turn to me and ask, do you want to come see the butterflies too? And I would say, oh no, no thank you. That sounds like something out of my worst nightmare. And I didn't go and they did. So that worked out great. Yes, unfortunately, I was the person that would jump up into hysterical fits and kind of dance around waving my arms and screaming. I'm embarrassed to admit if you mentioned that something was crawling on me. And so in high school and middle school, I was the butt of many pranks and jokes just so that people could see my reaction. Also, if there was a visible spider or something like that in the bathroom, I would just not go until that spider disappeared or I found another bathroom. Because one, not only was I afraid to be near bugs, but two, I also was terrified of killing them or taking them outside, because I had this like crazy thought that if I killed them, that their relatives would like come and attack me with a vengeance like some sort of insect mafia. Yes, I do realize how pathetic that sounds, but that's just how I reacted to bugs. So that brings us to present day. Did you know that bugs in the country are on a completely different level than bugs in the city? Meaning, in terms of population and variety and sheer impossibility of avoiding, it's just way more intense in the country. And that makes sense because I do have these memories when we lived in the Bay Area of like the city sending out notices in the mail, letting you know that, on such and such day at such and such time, the city will be spraying for mosquitoes and other flying pest insects. And please be advised to limit outdoor time during those times and close your doors and windows. And living in the city, it sort of seemed like, oh, that was just normal procedure. And, because of it, we didn't have mosquitoes or gnats or anything that was biting us when we were outside in the warmer months. When you live out in the foothills or in the country or in rural areas, no city services are going to come out and spray. And in fact, you wouldn't want that to happen because bugs are necessary in your ecosystem. As we've said, they're pollinators. They are important parts of the food chain. Some are pests and annoying, but the vast majority of them do things that are good, and to get rid of them would be terrible. But how does one such as myself, who does not want them to be around her, deal with living in the country? One might hope and say that maturity and acceptance, that the majority of the bugs we encounter are harmless and important, would be enough of a reason that I am just less visibly hysterical all the time and, an adult about this. And still others might think that I have just become desensitized to the fear and am living in this peaceful one-sided truce with all things creepy crawly. But a select few know that actually that fear still persists inside my head, rent-free. But in order to not pass on such an irrational type of terror to my children, I swallow down the terror and hysterics that bubble up in my throat, and instead of screaming, I say, "Wow, look at that grasshopper. Isn't it cool?" Or, "Yeah, let's plant more flowers to attract more butterflies in our garden." I still sidestep the spiders in the hallway. I tell the kids it's because they are around and catching all the bugs that I dislike even more, which is true. And I still refuse to let the quote-unquote cute caterpillars crawl on me. Hopefully I'm doing a good enough job to encourage them to pick up the earthworms and play with the roly-polies and make friends with all of the other creepy crawlies in my garden, while still hoping that they don't come bring these magical new discoveries anywhere near my vicinity. We've got guineas to keep the clouds of bugs at a minimum, and I'll talk more about these curious birds on our blog a little bit later. But some bugs are unavoidable, which brings us back to the fly issue. Flies. Animals attract flies. Big animals attract a lot of flies. Sometimes on our farm, at certain times of the year, you can hear the flies before you see them. The buzzing of hundreds upon thousands, upon hopefully not millions of flies. They're attracted by the manure, first and foremost, by the animal food, and even by the smell and the warmth of the animals themselves. Flies are annoying at the minimum. They can lay eggs in food and that become maggots and spoil animal feed. Some flies bite, and those bites can ulcerate and become infected, and still other kinds carry disease and bacteria that can develop into more problematic issues, and they can really inflict damage on little animals that haven't developed strong immune systems. This was particularly true in the case of Brownie, Lavelle's little calf. Flies tend to swarm cows around their bellies, where it's nice and warm and cool, nice and warm for their body heat, and away from direct sunlight, and around their faces, because this is really gross, but female flies in particular like to drink the liquid from the cow's eyes. And kind of like how female mosquitoes eat blood to gain a protein before they can lay their eggs. Female flies do the same thing. They really like that delicacy, I guess. And so flies would swarm around this poor calf's face, causing his eyes to weep from the irritation, which attracted more flies, which caused more irritation that eventually developed into conjunctivitis, more commonly known as pink eye. Pink eye in its mild forms is annoying. It's noticeable by the streaming of the eyes in your animals and also in humans, but it can be treated with a wash. A lot of animal supply stores sell an over-the-counter antibiotic spray you can just clean your eyes out with, and doing that on a regular basis gives the eye a chance to clean itself and heal. But in the case of Brownie, he had no desire to hold still or come close enough for an eye spray to be effective. And when my husband would go into the pen, by himself, because he was either with my daughter or alone, and we didn't want her in an animal pen without supervision, the two mother cows, even Daisy, and Brownie's not even her calf, they would get pretty agitated as my husband was chasing around the calf, and obviously he was a little bit stressed out because those two mothers were following him around and trying to be protective, and so it wasn't the best environment to be flushing out an eye without getting attacked by an angry mom cow. So unlike the other cases of pink eye that we've had on the farm that we could treat pretty readily and it would just go away, Brownie's eye was just getting worse and worse because we couldn't treat it. Cue me last week finally being able to get out on my feet and outside and make it out to the cow pen to see the eye for myself for the first time. My husband was just sort of relaying this information to me on a daily basis. Today he was unsuccessful. Today he kind of got a good squirt in. And the few successful sprays that he had that had hit home weren't effective this late in the stage of conjunctivitis. And so we had to escalate treatment after consulting with our vet, and me becoming the second person involved to make this treatment more successful. Actually, there would be 3 people because someone has to hold the baby while I'm in the cow pen with my husband. So this is how treatment goes. We were told to get a patch to glue onto our calf's eye because that would reduce the number of flies getting directly into his face, and also kind of take the glare of the sun off the eyes because it's very sensitive to light at this stage. We were also given a subdermal needle antibiotic shot and an antibiotic ointment to be applied directly to the eye. You can make an eye patch by cutting an old pair of jeans, the denim in the shape of a patch, essentially. Also, Tractor Supply sells a box of pre-made patches and a tube of cemented glue. So either way, they're pretty readily available. So my husband gets in the pen, and I come in after him so that it's easier to route animals if you have 2 people or more than one person. and kind of coax them into the direction where you want them to go. And also a second set of eyes to make sure that if the cows start getting aggressive, like I can scream or something, or maybe distract them. I don't know. So we got Brownie into a little holding pen away from the adult cows, and we were able to put a patch on him. The second time when we had to do this in order to apply the shot in the first round of the eye ointment, this little 80-pound calf, who can't see very well, obviously, because he's only got one good eye, decided that to get away from my husband, he was going to jump, and he didn't see that the water trough was right next to him, and he just landed right into the trough. And then my husband jumps in after him and starts kind of wrestling him to the ground, but now they're both wet, they're both slippery, and the poor little calf kind of panics and lets out this bleat, that ma sound, and that sets off the mom cows like nobody's business. We're in a little pen that's that normally Lavelle stays in at night to be separated and ready for the milking in the morning. It's just made up of cattle panel and T-bars and held together by baling twine. And when the calf bleated, those moms were just roaring and hollering at the top of their throat. Have you ever heard an angry mother cow? It's kind of terrifying. And they're just running up and down the length of the cattle panel, like very concerned about the state of their baby. And I had the thought, I hope my husband drove those T-bars deep enough into the ground and Daisy doesn't decide to stick one of her horns into the bars and just knock the whole thing down. Because those two mothers would murder us, no second thoughts. And there was no way we'd be able to get away from them. But thankfully, the T-bars held. We are still alive because I'm recording this. And we gave Brownie a shot, and I gave him 1/2 of antibiotic ointment. It was a little nerve-wracking for me because I'd been away from this like animal handling experience for a couple months now, and I was a little bit out of practice. But you know, the worst thing that happened to me was that I got that eye patch cement all over my hands, and then subsequently that got all covered in hay. And also I ended up kneeling in a very fresh cow pie in my leggings because I made the mistake of not wearing jeans, and so had to take a shower very quickly. But other than that, it went pretty well. The second day, we noticed that the patch had kind of fallen off, partly because I was sort of messing with it to treat his eye and take a better look at it. And also, I think we noticed that he was able to kind of scratch at it with his back hoof, and that kind of loosened the edges. So we caught him again to apply a second round of antibiotic ointment, and then apply, a new patch to hopefully be more successful. Because my husband has had to catch him, though, he's gotten really good at cow wrestling, which is like an impressive skill for someone. I should enter him into the rodeo. Thankfully, modern medicine and antibiotics proved to be powerfully effective, and Brownie's eye quickly cleared up, and he seems to be able to see just fine. There is a little bit of scarring, but that is pretty common considering the late stage of conjunctivitis that he had. It didn't infect any of the other cows in our herd, which I'm very thankful for, because I can't imagine having to wrestle an adult cow to give them this sort of treatment. So, back to the flies. How does one get rid of flies? I'll just sort of say I have no idea. If you know, please let me know. So one of the big things, is to keep what attracts flies under control or to a minimum. So in the case of the animals, it's mainly their manure, scooping out pens, or the poop corner of the pig's pen because they like to go in the same place all the time, or clearing out the chicken coop, making sure that any of the animal like food slops that aren't eaten get covered up or removed or composted, that all does a lot in reducing the amount of flies that you have on hand. Putting the animals out on pasture actually really helps reduce the flying bug problem, because they're taking the flies away, and whatever cow pies that they have are interspersed within the larger area of the pasture. And flies tend to not travel more than like 20 feet or something like that from the place where they're hatched. So the larger your pasture is, or the more frequently you rotate them, the higher chance that the number of flies that they carry with them or attracted to them is reduced simply through that movement. But what happens if you don't have endless pastures for your animals? A lot of people like to keep their chickens in with their cows, because chickens and other, fowl in general are really good at scratching through cow patties and getting the maggots before they become adult flies. But then you have all the issues that come with free-ranging chickens. A non-chicken prevention method is sprinkling manure or problematic areas with diatomaceous earth, or a DE as it's commonly known. Just remember that when you do that, please wear lung protection, because diatomaceous earth is actually pulverized fossils, and when you spread them over areas, it enters underneath exoskeletons and interferes with their like biomechanics and kind of cuts them up, actually, because they're like little microscopic shards of glass, and that's how you get rid of bugs. But also imagine inhaling that dust. That kind of glass type fossils can also do extreme damage to your lungs, so please be careful in your use of it. If you don't have large pastures and you keep your animals in pens, you can reduce the amount of flies by using a deep bedding method. I think Justin Rhodes featured this method in one of his YouTube videos, and also Joel Salatin mentions it a lot when he uses it for overwintering his animals. But basically, in a smaller confined space, you reduce the smells and manure that's available for bugs to grow in, and by covering it with a layer of organic matter like wood chips or mulch or straw or something like that on a fairly frequent basis, and over time that composts, and so it's very usable at the end of when you remove it from the pen, and also helps reduce the amount of bugs, and it generates warmth over the winter because that compost itself is an exothermic reaction, is releasing heat the whole time. This deep bedding method does require access to a lot of organic material, which is not always possible for people, either because of geography or resources, or it's cost prohibitive. So you really want to look into that before you get started with it. Even though we keep our cows on pasture, we still do get a pile up of cow manure close by in their little pen area, because, as I said, we keep Lavelle in a separate pen at night for our once a day calf sharing milking method. So we kind of do a combination of the pasture and the small animal pen fly reduction techniques. But even if you do all of those things and fairly regularly and are good at maintaining like the cleanliness and of your animal pens, flies still tend to swarm the animals anyway, simply because they are on their actual bodies. So to combat that, we do fly sprays. We use a homemade fly spray. We have used store-bought fly sprays in the past, but we try to avoid that, since the cows we're spraying, especially Lavelle, are animals that we drink their milk from, and we don't want to be exposed to those sort of chemical additives. Our homemade fly spray is a mixture of vinegar, water, dish soap, or glycerin, and essential oils, and so wouldn't be harmful to ingest. Also, don't trim your cow's tails as a fly prevention method, because even though sometimes those tails are long and annoying, especially when your cow decides to swat you in the head with it, they're long for a reason. That's how they get the flies off of their ears and closer to their heads, and things like that. Sometimes we hang up fly paper. You can buy them in like big long rolls that are like a foot wide instead of the little curly ribbons. And we would roll out like 3 or 4 feet of it during a milking session, like in the height of summer. And in about 15 minutes, that whole 3 to 4 feet of fly paper would just be completely covered in flies, which is really disgusting, but also incredibly satisfying to get rid of so many in one go. But ripping that paper off and feeling the paper just buzzing and vibrating under your fingers is a really disconcerting feeling. There are other options like those little traps where you dump some chemicals that smell like literal death and water, and that attracts flies. They kind of go in to the trap, get stuck, and you have to go and dump it out fairly frequently. I'd say like once a week or every other week, depending on your fly population, and refill it with more of that really awful smelling additive in order to keep on top of the fly population. One preventative method that we haven't used, but I have heard good things about, is to raise fly predators. And a fly predator is just a type of bug that preys on flies, more specifically fly larvae. But you can buy them in a package and just release them into areas where you have a large fly problem. But for me and for our farm, the idea of getting more bugs to combat the already existing bugs is a bit inconceivable. And also, I do think that the guineas that we have on our farm would be pretty excited to feast on a new type of bug. And then what would be the point? So I have these conversations with our other farm mom neighbor friends, and we go through the cycles and methods that I just mentioned on what they've found to be useful and effective that year to combat the flies. For farm work, a practical, very easy method is that we reduce, or we're very selective about the hours of the day in which we do certain types of farm work. Like we schedule the bulk of work like milking or, if necessary, animal processing to the very early hours or the evening hours of the day to avoid, when the flies are most active. And it also avoids the heat of the day in the summertime. For the indoor fly problem, I have this really great, super cheap little bug zapper that sits on our kitchen window, and it attracts the flies and the dust moths and basically a lot of the flying insects that get into our house, and it makes the most satisfying loud exploding popping sound every time a bug flies into it, and it just brings me a lot of joy. But I think the most effective fly method is to wait until the end of the summer, which is kind of a bummer that is the most effective thing. But once the cool weather hits, the insects go away because they can't survive the winter time. And so I'm really grateful at this point that we're already into August and there's just one more month of hot weather before the highs don't seem quite so high and I can start snuggling up in cozy sweaters again and hopefully be more physically active to catch up on the work that I've just put aside or lagged in completing in the summertime. And that's it. That probably wasn't very helpful because really my answer to the fly problem is nothing really works 100%. But, I do have to admit that the flies also play a role in our ecosystem, as I mentioned before. I just try to keep them at bay and to more digestible amounts, I guess, or more tolerable amounts. Hopefully, as fly season ends and we enter another type of bug season, because there's always something throughout the year. I'll have more information to share with you and more stories from the farm. Thank you again for joining us on our podcast. We are always happy and grateful that you took the time to sit with us and listen to our farm stories. If there are fly methods that you find to be really effective at your home or your homestead, please let us know in your comments on our website, or any other questions or comments that you might have. Our website is silvergoosefamilyfarm.com, and if you'd like to stay current with the things that are going on at our homestead, please follow us on our Instagram, the same handle, Silver Goose Family Farm. Thank you again for listening to us, and I hope to be able to bring you another story soon. Bye!